founders Marcus and Joni Lamb, 2007-2011. And because of that work, she was able to observe firsthand what was happening in the Lamb family as well as at Daystar TV. What if you were mistaken about what you believed to be true about Daystar before these charges were made public? Oddly enough, Julie Roy has disclosed information that Joni Lamb wished to keep private. The findings have already stunned members of the religious community. This is not merely a scandal. How deep does this go? What else has been buried under the surface? This choice has the potential to permanently alter Daystar. Even Joni Lamb's strongest fans were shocked when she abruptly announced that she was leaving Daystar. She was the network's constant presence for years. Millions of viewers associated her face with faith, strength, and continuity as she took over following the death of Marcus Lamb. Therefore, it didn't feel like a natural transition or a church leader retiring quietly when the news was announced. It seemed abrupt, as if the group had been struck hard. The time was what really got folks talking. A few days prior, investigative journalist Julie Roy had released a shocking investigation that dissected Daystar's business practices and questioned the integrity of the company's leadership as well as its finances. It was more than a narrative or criticism. After reading the thoroughly researched study, people paused to consider whether what they had long believed was actually what it seemed to be. Joni was no stranger to storms. Her personal life was discussed, along with the speed at which she remarried following Marcus's passing and the network's wealth. However, it wasn't the case here. Julie Roy has a reputation for probing deeply and exposing secrets that others sought to conceal. Because of this, it was difficult to dismiss her work as mere noise. Many saw Joni's abrupt departure as evidence that the narrative had struck a chord. Many hurried to her defense, claiming that she was resigning to avoid distracting the minister. Critics, however, viewed it as the initial error in a meticulously constructed image. Behind the news reports, I felt deceived. For many years, Daystar was more than just television. It was essential to many people's spiritual well-being. It gave them a sense of belonging to a larger religious family and a closer relationship with God. That family was under a lot of stress as a result of Roy's admissions and Joni's departure. Did they no longer believe what they believed to be true? Did the leader they trusted conceal more information than she disclosed to them? Those questions were promptly raised in church and on social media, resulting in contentious debates that grew worse by the hour. It's possible that Joni believed that the only way to end the situation before it got out of control was to leave. However, the fact that she remained silent about the reason simply added to the mystery. Her disappearance left a void filled with doubt, whispers, and stories rather than clarity. Previously, the narrative focused on a dependable church leader continuing her husband's work. These days, suspicion, an investigation, and negative events are all involved. Julie Roy had struck the match. But the explosion that revealed to everyone the base's weakness was Joni's hasty escape. There was more to the argument between Julie Roy and Joni Lamb than their lack of compatibility. With drastically divergent perspectives on the function of faith, power, and accountability, two very different worlds were merging. Investigative journalist Julie Roy, who was renowned for going where others would not, and for never being scared to speak with prominent Christians, was on one side. Joni Lamb, the longtime face of Daystar, was on the other side. For years, she had presented herself as a devoted wife, a servant of God, and a lady who was committed to continuing her late husband's job. Both ladies were strong, powerful, and determined. However, the Christian community was rocked when their experiences came together. We returned from our honeymoon in July. Oh, I see. And there are questions all over the internet about the things that Daystar paid $100,000 for. Hey, I was going to ask you about that. Yes. In other words, no way. Our honeymoon was paid for. All right, so that's another lie out there. Julie Roy earned a living by asking tough questions. People who believed but felt misled by leaders saw her as a voice of justice, and people in the world she was trying to protect often turned against her because she refused to let emotions or her image stop her from seeking the truth. Joni Lamb stood for something very different. For many years, she was seen as a calming force in Christian radio and TV. She had shown how ministries mismanaged their money, how Christian groups abused their power, and how leaders who seemed untouchable did bad things. She said frequently that her purpose came from her faith, and that being responsible and telling the truth were important because they honored God. She co-founded Daystar with her husband Marcus, which has become one of the world's largest Christian TV networks, giving millions of viewers and listeners the impression that they were a part of a global faith family by allowing them to watch its shows and listen to its speakers. People liked Joni because she was gregarious, she was able to connect with people, and she worked hard to make Daystar more popular. After Marcus's death, she took over the role alone, becoming a heartbroken widow and a leader whose job it was to keep the network together. Many of Joni's fans saw her as more than just a host. She was a spiritual figure who stood for patience, faith, and the belief that God had called her to continue Marcus's work. However, cracks began to appear, with allegations regarding Daystar's finances, dubious decisions, and Joni's personal choices. As usual, Julie Roy began to investigate. The fact that they believed Julie Roy was harming the church and dismantling a ministry that had brought hope and faith to millions of people made it clear that these two individuals came from very different backgrounds. Julie was a reporter, and in that line of work, one finds the truth through proof, papers, and responsibility. The stories Joni heard were influenced by her image, her loyalty, and the way she discussed religion. Julie used facts and research to support her, and Joni's tools were testimonies based on religion and emotional connection. Because when those worlds collided, confusion ensued. Julie Roy's admirers commended her for having the courage to tell powerful people the truth, citing scandals that occurred in other offices, and stating that wrongdoing would not be discovered without reporters like her. Supporters of Joni, on the other hand, had very different opinions. They believed that Julie's style was bad, that her only goal was to bring down church leaders and not to build them up, that she was trying to get attention, and that she was using other people's mistakes to make a name for herself. That her years of preaching, her charitable work, and her part in carrying on Marcus's legacy showed that she was sincere, that even though she had done wrong, she was still God's worker, and that tearing her down would damage the faith of those who looked up to her. They saw her as a modern-day prophet who was speaking out against corruption in the church, just as biblical prophets did when they spoke out against leaders who did not follow God's rules. Julie and Joni became the faces of this conflict because they represented two opposing ideas that had existed for a long time, but had never clashed so publicly. The media exacerbated this conflict by portraying Julie as the strict watchdog and Joni as the weak boss in news stories, and there were heated arguments in the comment sections, debates and hashtags on social media, which became a battleground. It became more than just a personal fight. It became a sign. It was a sign of a larger problem in modern Christianity. It's difficult to protect leaders and departments for the sake of unity, while also holding them accountable for the sake of honesty. In some ways, both women were being honest, which made the fight even worse. Joni genuinely believed that people were criticizing her work without reason, and that she was called by God to continue, even though people were saying negative things about it. Neither of them thought of herself as bad. Sincerity only made things worse between them and their followers, who remained even more steadfast in their beliefs. In addition to the controversy surrounding Daystar, there was also a larger discussion about the role of leadership, money, and transparency in Christian organizations. It was a painful wake-up call for some, and for others, it was an unfair attack on someone they looked up to. But for everyone who watched, it was a warning that the truth can't always be hidden, even in the world of faith. Could a church have private jets and fancy homes and still be seen as committed to God's work? Do you think that investigative reporters should be seen as truth-tellers or as forces that cause trouble? Were Joni Lamb's charges fair, or had she been shielded from responsibility for too long? In the end, Julie Roy and Joni Lamb's accident was more than just a story. The accusations against Daystar and Joni Lamb were more than just words of disapproval. They were direct questions about money, luxury, and honesty. Daystar had been marketed for years as a place of faith, a way to spread the gospel, give people hope, and connect Christians worldwide. And Joni Lamb saw herself as the steady hand that kept that goal going, especially after the death of her husband Marcus. Many viewers had initially trusted the show, but when stories surfaced about poor financial decisions, such as purchasing a private jet, that trust began to erode. At first, it might have seemed like a small thing for a ministry to own a jet, but Joni said that the decision was necessary for the ministry's work, and that flying commercial wasn't always feasible to meet the demands of global broadcasting. A jet isn't a cheap tool after all, and this is a sign. That sign made people uncomfortable by making them wonder what was really important, whether it was to spread the message or make the leaders more comfortable. As more information became available, people began to pay more attention to how Daystar handled its finances, much of it due to Julie Roy's investigations, which revealed that the way donations were handled wasn't clear. Those who had sent money out of faith started to wonder, was their kindness really supporting ministry, or was it paying for extravagance? This didn't help. Before they quit their jobs, someone told them the heartbreaking story of answering a call from a woman who had only a small line of credit on her card during a fundraiser event. She believed the presenter when he said that God would return her gift tenfold. These kinds of stories hurt a lot and made people doubt the ministry's honesty. The damage spread quickly. For people who had believed in Joni for years, these news stories hit close to home. Daystar wasn't just another TV station. It was a vital part of their faith. It was painful to hear that money might have been wasted, or that unnecessary things like private planes were being bought. Trust is a crucial component of faith, and when it is broken, it hurts more than any other kind of loss. Joni retaliated emotionally, telling the public that Daystar's finances were fine and that the accusations were either completely false or greatly exaggerated, making the criticism sound like an attack on the church, a plot to discredit the work God had called them to do. She said that Daystar's good deed, such as helping those in need, responding to disasters, and producing shows that touched millions of people, demonstrated that the ministry had a clean heart. However, some people didn't believe her, and the Jets' issues became a sign of something much bigger. It was more than just a single purchase. It was about what it stood for. Many saw it as an indication of the widening gap between the values of humility and service that were promoted on the air and the way of life that people appeared to be leading behind the scenes. It raised the tension that always arises when ministries expand into large organizations that receive gifts worth millions of dollars. It's easy to blur the boundaries between what is and isn't a luxury in order to use them as tools for service. But once people see those options, they can quickly lose trust. Even worse was the role of openness, or the lack of it. People expect nonprofits, especially churches, to be cautious and transparent about how they spend their funds. And donors want to know that their money is being used wisely. The media jumped on the story as it developed, making Daystar's jet and business dealings national news. And suddenly Joni was not just the sad widow carrying her husband's dream. She was the center of a scandal. Every decision she made is scrutinized closely, and some viewers couldn't take it any longer, so they quietly stopped watching, either by switching the station or stopping their donations. When people are asked questions and given evasive or defensive answers, it makes them even more suspicious. The story of the accusations, the Jets, and the broken trust was a turning point in Joni Lamb's time as Daystar's leader. It wasn't just a problem with money. It was a crisis of faith. Despite the fights and news stories, the people who had given, hoped, and trusted were often the ones left wondering if someone had used their faith against them. For those who had given their last dollar because they thought they were investing in God's work, the thought that the money might have been wasted on fun instead of service was heartbreaking. Even if Daystar doesn't survive the damage, the lesson has already been written. When the storm surrounding Daystar and Joni Lamb finally peaked, there was shock, but then there was a long period of fallout, reflection, and hard questions that wouldn't go away. Daystar had been one of the most trusted names in Christian radio and TV for a long time, and people consistently watched, sent donations, and had a strong faith in the goal that Marcus and Joni Lamb had set out. However, when stories about money, spending on nice things, and potential dishonesty broke, many people's trust started to break in ways that might never completely recover. The fallout started with the watchers, who had prayed with Daystar late at night and shared stories about how the network had changed their lives. The most painful thing was realizing that faith and money had been linked in ways that seemed dishonest, that giving a certain amount would bring blessings, or that planting seeds in the church would grow a harvest. This no longer felt like hope for many people, and it looked and felt like abuse. At the same time, some people fought hard to protect Joni, talking about how dedicated she had been for years, how strong she had been after Marcus' death, and all the good things Daystar had done around the world, like crisis relief and helping people in need. They were upset about more than just a jet, or reports that money had been wasted, and they were saddened by the possibility that their money might not have gone where they had thought it would. They said that attacks happen on all ministries, and that no boss is perfect. Not only did they ask about Daystar, but they also asked about the church today as a whole. Why do so many organizations get so big and rich? How come leaders who talk a lot about being humble and giving up things live like stars instead of servants? Why do so many people keep giving without question, even after hearing things that are upsetting? They saw the criticism as something that diverted their focus from their primary goal, which was to spread the message. This disagreement not only angered viewers, but it also created tension in churches as members and preachers argued over whether the accusations were evidence of wrongdoing or simply a part of running such a large ministry. It was a wake-up call for the church community, and leaders realized that being open and honest was no longer an option. In this age of social media and instant news, it's very easy for secrets and lies to spread quickly and forever. Ministries began to assess their own boards, accountability systems, and structures to see if they were strong enough to stop a trust problem like the one Daystar was going through. It was easy to see the big picture. No church, no matter how big, could stand up to the scrutiny of today's audience if it wasn't honest and open. The role of the media was also considered, and Julie Roy's research was largely responsible for bringing many of these issues to light. Others said that she created trouble and dismantled rather than restored things. Her work demonstrated that Christian organizations need to be more accountable, that no leader, no matter how popular, should be above scrutiny, and that the Daystar scandal was about more than just Joni Lamb in a private jet. It was about what happens when money, power, and faith all come together. It was about how trust in ministry is weak, and how quickly it can be lost when words and deeds don't match. It was about how easy it is to turn kindness into guilt or duty, and how bad it can be when that happens. Most importantly, it demonstrated to everyone, leaders, followers, and those outside the group, that the message of faith is too important to allow scandals involving money and secrecy. There is more to the story than just one ministry or leader. It's about how the church is constantly divided between spiritual goals and weak people. Many times, people are told that leaders are just people, and people make mistakes. Therefore, they want to believe in leaders who are bigger than life. For Joni, the fallout has been extremely emotional. She is still a controversial figure, with some people still supporting her, and others feeling betrayed beyond repair. Daystar's task is not only to stay alive financially, but also to stay alive spiritually. The network is trying to repair its reputation in a world that will never see it the same way again, and the Christian community as a whole continues to think. The church's response is what will matter most, not by making excuses or lying, but by reaffirming your commitment to honesty, accepting responsibility, and returning to the main points of the message. That's the only way to restore the trust that Daystar's issue damaged.